White cop confronts female black judge, accuses her of stealing the car she was driving. It was a quiet, ordinary morning in the city, or at least that's how Judge Simone Harris had planned it. She was a woman of authority, known throughout the legal community for her sharp intellect, unyielding principles, and of course, her ability to navigate the complexities of the judicial system with grace and poise. As a black woman in a predominantly white profession, she had worked twice as hard to get where she was. Today, like any other, she was dressed in a crisp business suit, her mind focused on the cases she was about to hear in court. Simone had decided to take a quick detour before heading into her chambers. Her car, a sleek black SUV, was her refuge, her small space of solitude away from the hustle and bustle of the courthouse. She had stopped by a local cafe to grab a coffee before her workday began. She pulled into a small parking lot, the early morning sunlight casting long shadows over the pavement. Her high heels clicked against the concrete as she made her way into the cafe, a familiar routine she'd built into her life. The barista knew her order by heart. A medium black coffee, no sugar, just the way she liked it. She smiled and nodded as she took her drink, ready to face whatever the day would bring. As she stepped back out into the parking lot, she noticed a squad car parked a little too close to her vehicle. She didn't think much of it at first. After all, it wasn't unusual for police officers to be in the area. But as she approached her SUV, she saw the officer standing near her car, watching her intently. He was a tall, white officer in his late 30s with a stern look on his face. He didn't greet her or make any effort to make her feel comfortable. Instead, he crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing as she got closer. "Ma'am, is this your car?" he asked, his voice sharp and accusatory. Simone stopped in her tracks, taken aback by the question. She looked at him, then at her car, then back at him, wondering if she had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of confusion. "This car, is it yours?" The officer repeated, his stance rigid, as though he were about to make an arrest. Simone raised an eyebrow. "Yes, officer, it's mine," she replied, feeling a knot form in her stomach. The interaction felt off, but she couldn't quite place why. Her car was legally hers, paid off and registered. There should have been no question about it. The officer, however, wasn't finished. "Well, I've got reason to believe this car was stolen," he said bluntly. "We ran the plates, and it came back to a different owner." Simone blinked, her mind racing. She had been driving the same car for the past 3 years without any issues. She wasn't sure what this officer was getting at, but she certainly wasn't going to let him accuse her of something she didn't do. "I assure you, officer, this car is mine. I've had it for years," she said, her tone now laced with both confusion and frustration. She wasn't used to being questioned like this, especially not about something as mundane as her car. The officer remained unmoved, his face expressionless. "I'm going to need to see your identification and proof of ownership," he said coldly. "I'm not sure what's going on here, but I'm going to need to check your paperwork." Simone's blood began to boil. She was a judge, for crying out loud. She didn't have to explain herself to anyone, especially not to a cop who was accusing her of car theft without any evidence. But she knew that arguing with him wouldn't help her case. She had to remain calm, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. "All right," Simone said, taking a deep breath. "I'll show you my ID, but I don't have time for this." She reached into her purse, pulling out her driver's license, and handed it to him. She was still trying to make sense of the situation, but she knew better than to let her emotions get the best of her. The officer took her ID, scanning it quickly before turning his gaze back to her. He wasn't satisfied with just her license, though, and the registration and title to the vehicle, he asked, his voice growing more insistent. Simone felt a flicker of anger. She had never been treated like this before, not by anyone. But she knew better than to let her temper flare up in public. "I'll be happy to show you the paperwork, officer," she said, pulling out her car's registration from the glove compartment and handing it over to him. The officer took the papers, his eyes scanning the details. For a moment, the tension hung in the air, and Simone couldn't help but feel like a suspect under interrogation. She was a black woman, And this officer, despite her being a judge, was treating her like she was guilty of something simply because of her appearance. Everything seems to check out. The officer finally said, though he still seemed unconvinced, but I'll need to call it in to verify the vehicle's history. I don't like what I'm seeing here. Simone's patience was wearing thin. She had already shown him everything he needed to see. There was no reason for this unnecessary delay. She had done nothing wrong. As a judge, she had dealt with hundreds of police officers, but this felt different. There was a racial undertone to his behavior, one that she couldn't ignore. She had experienced it before, but not like this, not from someone who should have known better. Officer, Simone said, her voice now firm and authoritative, I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal. I am a judge in this city. You're accusing me of something that is not only ridiculous but insulting. I demand to speak to your superior. The officer hesitated, clearly thrown off by her demand. He wasn't used to people questioning his authority, especially not someone who was black and female. But Simone had reached her limit. She had endured far too much in her life to let this go without a fight. Fine, he said begrudgingly. I'll make the call, but don't get any ideas about causing trouble. Simone watched him as he dialed his superior's number, her mind racing. She had no idea why this was happening, but she was determined to get to the bottom of it. As the officer spoke into the phone, Simone took a few moments to collect her thoughts. The situation was absurd, but she knew she couldn't let it escalate. She had been a part of the system for years, and now it was time to use her own experience to navigate this mess. After what felt like an eternity, the officer finally hung up the phone. He turned back to Simone, looking somewhat deflated. Turns out, the car's not stolen, he said, his tone begrudging. It was a mix-up with the registration. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Simone stared at him, her eyes hard. You're sorry? She repeated, her voice low and controlled. You've just wasted my time, treated me like a criminal, and accused me of stealing a car in broad daylight. Do you have any idea who I am? The officer shifted uncomfortably, but there was no apology in his eyes. I'm just doing my job, he muttered, trying to brush off the tension. Simone took a deep breath, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She had been calm, composed, but this was too much. She had been harassed for no reason other than the color of her skin, and she wasn't going to let it slide. I'll be filing a complaint, she said, her words deliberate. I expect you to report this incident to your superior. This behavior is unacceptable, and it will not go unchallenged. The officer's eyes widened, and for the first time, he looked truly uncomfortable. Simone knew that this was just the beginning of a larger fight, one that would involve holding him accountable, but also ensuring that the system he represented was held to the same standards of justice that she upheld in her courtroom every day. As Simone got into her car and drove away, the weight of the encounter lingered in the air. She was angry, yes, but more than that, she was determined. She had the power, the knowledge, and the experience to fight this injustice. She would not let one officer's ignorance and racial bias tarnish her day or her sense of self. She was a judge for a reason, and she would make sure that this officer and anyone who thought they could get away with such behavior was held accountable. The fight for justice, she knew, was never truly over. It was an ongoing battle, one that she was ready to face every day in the courtroom and in the world beyond.